Today in history, on the March 30th, the bells of Palermo rang for evening prayer. It was a routine sound, one the city had heard every night for generations. But on this particular evening, those bells would become the signal for one of the most violent uprisings in medieval history, an event that would shatter an empire, redraw the map of the Mediterranean, and launch a war that lasted 20 years. Outside the Church of the Holy Spirit, a French soldier stopped a Sicilian woman. She was on her way to Vespers. What happened next would never be agreed upon by historians. Some say he groped her, others say he simply demanded to search her for weapons. But every account agrees on one thing: the woman's husband saw it. And he refused to stand by. The husband struck first. The French soldier fell dead in the cobblestones outside the church. For a moment, everything stopped. Then someone in the crowd shouted a single word: "Death to the French." Within seconds, the bells of Palermo stopped ringing for prayer, and started ringing for something else entirely. To understand what happened on March 30th, 1282, you need to understand who ruled Sicily. King Charles of Anjou, brother of the King of France, had conquered the island in 1266. He was one of the most powerful men in Europe, a ruthless warrior who dreamed of building a Mediterranean empire. Sicily was supposed to be his stepping stone to Constantinople and beyond. For 20 years, the French ruled Sicily like a conquered colony. They taxed the Sicilians into poverty. They gave French nobles the best land and the highest offices. They stationed soldiers in Sicilian towns who treated the local people with contempt. Sicilians were not subjects in their own island, they were servants in it. And they never forgot it. In the months before March 1282, secret conspiracies had been forming across Sicily. Noblemen, merchants, even priests, all of them talking about rebellion. They were waiting for a sign. They were waiting for the right moment. They were waiting for a spark. On March 30th, outside a church in Palermo, they got it. The first Frenchman fell. Then the second. Then the third. Within an hour, the killing had spread across Palermo. The mob pulled French soldiers from taverns, French merchants from their shops, French families from their homes. The bells of every church in the city rang non-stop, the signal that the revolt had begun. The French fought back where they could. They were soldiers, trained men with swords and armor. But they were scattered across the city, caught completely off guard, and they were outnumbered 100 to 1. The Sicilians did not give them time to organize. They hunted them through the streets, house by house, alley by alley. By morning, the killing was over. When the Sicilians counted the dead, they found nearly 2,000 French bodies in the streets of Palermo alone. Soldiers, priests, merchants, women, children, none had been spared. The revolt had begun. And it was not finished yet. The news spread faster than anyone could control. Within days, the revolt had exploded across the entire island. In town after town, the Sicilians rose up and slaughtered their French occupiers. Some estimates say 4,000 French men, women, and children died in the first week alone. Charles of Anjou had lost Sicily in the span of a single night. Only the fortress of Messina held out against the revolt. French soldiers barricaded themselves inside the citadel while the city outside burned. They sent desperate messages to Charles on the mainland, begging for reinforcements. But Charles was in no position to help. His entire Sicilian kingdom was disintegrating beneath him. When Charles learned what had happened, his response was immediate and savage. He ordered his fleet to prepare. He began gathering an army of 30,000 men. He swore he would return to Sicily and burn every rebel town to the ground. But Charles had made a fatal mistake. he had created so many enemies that Sicily was already looking for another king. While Charles prepared for war, Sicilian leaders looked south, to Aragon. King Pedro III of Aragon had a claim to Sicily through his wife. He also had a deep hatred for the French. And he had a powerful fleet. When Sicilian ambassadors arrived at his court in Barcelona and offered him their crown, Pedro saw an opportunity he could not refuse. In August 1282, Pedro accepted the crown of Sicily. He landed at Trapani with his army and was hailed as a liberator. The Sicilians had found their king. And Charles of Anjou had found an enemy as powerful as himself. Charles now faced a nightmare. The revolt he had dismissed as a peasant uprising had become a full-scale war against the Kingdom of Aragon. He would spend the next 3 years trying to retake Sicily. He would fail at every turn. By the spring of 1283, Charles had assembled the largest invasion fleet the Mediterranean had ever seen. He planned to land in Sicily, crush the rebels, and hang Pedro of Aragon from the walls of Palermo. But Charles made a fatal error. He divided his fleet. And waiting for him was a man who would become his worst nightmare. Roger of Loria was one of the greatest naval commanders in history. He was a Sicilian who had chosen to fight for Aragon. He knew the waters around Sicily better than any French admiral. And he knew that Charles of Anjou had made a terrible mistake in dividing his fleet. At Malta, Roger of Loria destroyed half the French fleet. Then he sailed north and destroyed the other half off the coast of Naples. Charles watched from the shore as his invasion force sank beneath the waves. He never set foot on Sicilian soil again. Charles of Anjou had one advantage Pedro of Aragon did not, the Pope. Pope Martin IV was a Frenchman who owed his position to Charles. When the war began, the Pope did something unprecedented. He declared a crusade, not against Muslims, but against Aragon. He offered indulgences to anyone who would fight against Pedro III. The Pope's crusade brought France itself into the war. The French king, Philip III, assembled a massive army and marched south across the Pyrenees. He planned to conquer Aragon from the north while Charles attacked from Sicily. Pedro III was now fighting a war on two fronts against the two most powerful kingdoms in Europe. But the crusade did not go as planned. The French army was ravaged by dysentery in the mountains. Thousands died without ever fighting a battle. King Philip himself fell ill and died on the retreat. The crusade collapsed. Charles of Anjou had lost his greatest ally. Charles of Anjou never recovered from the Sicilian Vespers. He spent the last 3 years of his life trying to rebuild his fleet, gather new armies, find new allies. But the money was gone. The men were gone. The dream of a Mediterranean empire was gone. On January 7, 1285, Charles died in Foggia, a defeated king who had lost his richest kingdom. He was buried in Naples, the city from which he had once ruled half of Italy. But his tomb was modest. The man who had dreamed of conquering Constantinople, who had ruled Sicily with an iron fist, who had been one of the most powerful kings in Europe, he died with nothing but regret. The Sicilian Vespers had destroyed him. Pedro of Aragon died just 10 months after Charles. But he died having won. His son inherited the crown of Sicily. The island that Charles had conquered was now permanently part of the Aragonese crown. The Mediterranean would never be the same. The war did not end with the deaths of Charles and Pedro. It continued for another 17 years. Sons and grandsons inherited the conflict. The Mediterranean was never free of Aragonese and French fleets hunting each other. Finally, in 1302, the warring parties signed the Peace of Caltabellotta. The treaty recognized what the Sicilian Vespers had achieved. Sicily would remain separate from Naples. The island would be ruled by the Aragonese crown. The French Angevins would keep their kingdom on the Italian mainland. But they would never rule Sicily again. Chroniclers across Europe wrote about the Sicilian Vespers for generations. It became a warning: treat your subjects like conquered enemies, and they will rise up when you least expect it. 4,000 French dead in a single night. An empire shattered. A war that lasted 20 years. All of it started outside a church, when a soldier forgot that the people he ruled were still people. Today, the Church of the Holy Spirit still stands in Palermo. The bells still ring for evening prayer. But on March 30th, 1282, those bells rang for something else. They rang for liberation. They rang for the end of French rule. They rang for the birth of a new Sicily. A plaque on the church wall today marks the spot where it all began. But no plaque can capture what that night meant. The Sicilian Vespers changed the Mediterranean forever. It broke the power of the French Angevins. It elevated Aragon to a naval empire. And it gave Sicily something it had not had for 2 centuries, a king who ruled from Palermo, not from Paris. On March 30th, 1282, a French soldier stopped a Sicilian woman outside a church. Within 24 hours, 4,000 French were dead. Within a year, a new king ruled Sicily. Within a generation, the map of the Mediterranean had been redrawn. All because one man thought he could do anything he wanted, and the people around him finally said no.